We are at 63rd and Western, and this is the building where the draft boards, 32 draft boards covering the whole south side of Chicago, were located here. And we rented an office in the building as a bookstore, and this is where we got into the draft board offices and removed a lot of the material, mountains of files and cards, and burned them outside. We did not endanger the building, or much less endanger the life of anybody in there or anywhere around here.
Today, May 25th, 1969, we enter the Chicago South Side Draft Board Complex at 63rd and Western to remove and burn Selective Service records. We still have a dream of being able to communicate with this society, but we can no longer confine our peacemaking efforts to the ordinary channels of polite discourse, for we are confronting an extremely urgent situation in which the twin evils of American militarism and racism are monstrously interconnected. The poor people of the earth are taught to hate and kill one another in order that the powerful can enjoy the freedom to increase their fortunes through exploitative foreign investments. At the same time, the expansion of war-related industries diverts tax dollars away from the social programs so desperately needed here. Born and raised in poverty and oppression, young men from America's urban ghettos are forced to burn and kill poor peasants in a land of the third world in order to preserve a quote-unquote freedom which they themselves do not even enjoy in their own land.
What were your major objections to the war in Vietnam?
That was genocidal. The whole of Western civilization is based on genocide, the chattel slavery of the African Americans and the massacre of the Native Americans.
And we felt in our action that we were doing that on the south side of Chicago because the draft system was affecting and harming more members of minorities rather than the white majority. People in the minorities, especially blacks and Hispanics, were being called in and being inducted to serve and kill and die in Vietnam in disproportionate numbers, right?
Right.
So
we stopped the entire south and west sides from drafting. The
right.
draft office was shut for 18 months, which was longer than I was in prison.
So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Bob Clarke, and we're going to be reflecting about our mutual friend Ed Hoffmans. Bob, could you introduce yourself to the people who will be listening?
You gave the name Bob Clarke. I'm a resident of Chicago since 1970. I knew Ed long before that, as I'll tell you. And at the moment, I'm president of the Chicago Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights. and interested in progressive politics.
And when and where did you meet Ed the first time?
I encountered Ed for the first time in Manhattan, Kansas at Kansas State University. That was my first teaching job after I got my graduate work done, and I became a teacher of political science there. By coincidence, Ed was there doing a master's degree in English literature. And it happened in my first year. I was completely inexperienced. I was asked to do a book review for the student union. And just on an impulse, I said, all right, I'll review the book Candy by Terry Southern, which was a controversial and very risque book. I did it almost as a joke, but they agreed to the event and scheduled me. And then they canceled it after they read some of the text of the book, which I regarded indignantly as censorship. And I published an article in the university newspaper attacking the censorship. Ed saw that article, and in his capacity as president of the Newman Club, which will surprise some people, the Catholic student organization, he said, we will sponsor this event in the student union, and they did. So I did get to do the review that I originally scheduled, overcame the censorship, and then Ed and I became connected through that. It was an early expression of his willingness to break some rules, and his devotion to free expression, and a certain waggish sense of humor that I think he had too. Then I moved on to Iowa to a teaching job at Cornell College in 1965. By coincidence, Ed had moved on to Northern Iowa University, and by this time the Vietnam issue had become the central one in my life politically. And I became aware that Ed was available to give a very cutting-edge talk about the war. This was 1966 probably, so a little before many other people. And so I invited him to address the student body at our college on the topic of our conduct of the war in Vietnam as genocide, which was not a widely accepted view at the time, though I think has subsequently been amply documented.
The bombing of civilians and massacres that were carried out.
Nick Turse's book, Seymour Hersh's expose of My Lai and many My Lais that we now know about. So all of this was very new at that time to many listeners, but Ed made quite an impression in that speech.
So our people were in this building, and at one point at about 5 a.m. they broke into the draft board offices and started gathering up all the files, and then at one point they started coming down this fire escape with all the files. I was waiting out here in the car, and I had the gasoline which we used to douse the draft material and set it on fire.
It is not by accident that we perform our act of creative destruction at the Draft Board Center, which menaces the south side of Chicago. As white Americans, we bear a special responsibility with regard to the Selective Service system and the war machine it feeds, and we can no longer allow that system to function smoothly in our name, for we cannot tolerate the atrocities it perpetrates upon our brothers in America, in Vietnam, and in other parts of the world. Our action is negative, but also creative, for there is implied in our loud no a quiet but hopeful yes in our elimination of part of a death-dealing and oppressive system, the prelude to the creation of life and freedom.
Today I'm interviewing Joe Check, who knew Ed Hoffmans very well. Joe, could you tell us a little bit about your friendship with Ed?
Well, I got to know Ed Hoffmans after the Chicago 15 action, May 25th, 1969, 50 years ago. And it was after the action when the support people got together with the members of the 15 and decided what we were going to do to publicize the meaning of the action in order to try to bring about an end to selective service and the racist application of selective service in Chicago and to end the war in Vietnam. That's when I met Ed, and I got to know him as a friend because of his love for baseball and the Cubs, and we actually went to Wrigley Field together to see the Cubs. I got to know Ed as a friend because he happened to be living with us in early 1970. He needed a place to stay for a while as there were meetings to decide how we were going to support each other during this trial that was coming up. And he happened to be there when an emergency happened. My wife was pregnant and we had to get to the hospital right away, and Ed was there. I would not have been able to get Betty, my wife, into the car with Ed to make it to the hospital. And the doctor told me that not only would our daughter Grace not have survived, but my wife also would have passed away if she had been out of the hospital a half hour more. So this is the kind of event that sealed our relationship for the rest of his life and for mine. And my daughter Grace stayed close to Ed all her life, and she is now 49 years old and has just become a mother herself, which I know Ed would have been overjoyed to have known. Grace would always call him on his birthday and sing him happy birthday, and Ed would do the same for Grace.
The draft boards located here covered the whole south side of Chicago. And so the people who were registered here were members of minority groups, especially blacks and Hispanics, who were inducted and served in Vietnam in very disproportionate numbers. So part of our reason for choosing this particular set of draft boards was to dramatize that. So very shortly the Chicago police arrived and took us away to a police station and then to Cook County Jail, where we spent a few days before we were bailed out. We were first charged with burglary and arson by the state of Illinois, and then by the federal government with 4 counts in an indictment, including destruction of government property, interfering with the Selective Service system, and conspiracy to do those things. And then after a while, the state dropped their charges, and we were prosecuted by the federal government. Our trial was held in the federal building in Chicago. Our trial lasted about a month in 1970. We tried to present some of our reasons for the protest action, but the judge basically refused to allow us to present anything about the Vietnam War or the draft.
I got to know Ed after he got separated from the trial in 1970, and because he was judged not to be mentally fit to stand trial. And I also know that he was one of the first people that Betty and I and Grace, when she was born, visited when he was sent to Springfield, Missouri, to the federal prison for people with mental and physical disabilities.
But he was deemed capable of standing trial, right? And returned
yes.
to Chicago.
Yes. And the next time we visited him in prison was in Sandstone, Minnesota, when he was there with our other friends, Joe Mulligan and
Yes.
I think Chuck was there too.
Yes, right, and Fred.
And Fred.
Fred
That's
Chase,
right.
right. So your friendship grew over the years. What can you tell us about Ed's ongoing commitment to justice and to people in need, and how he acted on that commitment?
When Ed got out of prison, when he had finished doing his time, he became a public aid caseworker. And I know that he did everything he could to help his clients who were receiving public aid to have a better life. He did follow the rules, but he also followed them to benefit the clients who only survived because of the meager assistance they got from the state. So Ed would go in every neighborhood, in every public housing project. He went and he visited them. Some of his colleagues did not do that, but Ed always did. He always was thought to be one of the best caseworkers. He made friends among caseworkers that those friendships lasted all his life, even when Ed himself became more disabled and suffered this family illness of schizophrenia, really, and with periodic breakdowns that required medication checks and hospitalization. And he was on heavy-duty meds most of his life, which partially caused his physical disability because of the ramifications of taking those heavy-duty medications.
And what did they consist of? Massive numbers of people?
Right.
Uh-huh. Was there civil disobedience involved?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Sit-ins at congressional offices and so forth.
Okay. And do you and the others in the movement feel that you were effective? You got some results?
Yes, we did.
Okay. So there's a better understanding and better support for the rights of people with disabilities in this country?
Right. That started with a campaign to have people with disabilities ride public transportation.
Okay.
They would sit in front of a bus chained together, and they wouldn't move until the bus driver allowed them onto the bus.
So that was a great victory.
Right.
Very important victory, right. Congratulations. And do you see your involvement in that as a continuation of your involvement in the peace movement? Because the peace movement was also very much about justice.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I do.
My name is Susan Aarup, and I work in disability activism and social justice for close to 35 years. And I've known Ed, I knew Ed for about the past 20. He believed in doing the right thing, even if it meant going to prison, and he was a role model for me, and I think about him often when I do civil disobedience. He had a very giving spirit, but he knew that with freedom came a price, and he wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed in. Often he would get asked why he did what he did. Why did he go to jail for burning the draft files? jails. And he would say, because it was the right thing to do. And he said, if the world, he taught me something, if the world were a more just place, we wouldn't have to go to prison to make a statement. And he fought to live in the community and to live life under his own terms. For many years, was in the assisted living facility. That's how I first got to know him. He was a member of ADAPT, and so he always believed in social justice, and his legacy will live on.
Yes. What kinds of civil disobedience actions was Ed involved in that you recall, and have you been involved in yourself?
Trying to shut down a nursing home that had children with disabilities. So we were on the protest lines together for that. To have better community services so he could live in his own apartment with the assisted living. I think of Ed often and would visit him. Just a very good, dear man, and not afraid to stand up for what he believes in. But he always maintained his autonomy, even when he needed assistance. And it was good. And I can remember thinking to myself, gee, I hope I can do that at 80. Ed was a good man and a good role model. I miss him.
Yes, when they had their demonstrations and all, that Ed was the only one that could stand up and, could walk and all, and the others were all in wheelchairs. And then at the end, they would take them into the jail, and none of them would try to, get out of it. They'd go into jail, and they would stay for an hour. No, this is the next day that they got out. They would stay, and like I said, Ed was kind of the leader because he was at that time the only one who could walk in the hall. I had record of all of his, at one time, of all of his pictures when he was doing that. So that was really something.
So they would be, for instance, in the middle of State Street or someplace blocking
they
the
would
road,
block,
and
block so people couldn't get through.
and they were demanding better accessibility on, for instance, sidewalks and buildings for people with disabilities.
Right, and then they all went together into prison for the night, and then they let about in the morning.
Okay, so a real continuation of the tactics that we used in different form, of course, but very different form, but the tactics of nonviolent civil disobedience.
Right, and you just, you never resisted, you just were there.
Susan, did Ed ever speak of the Chicago 15 action and his participation in it?
Yes, all the time. He was very proud of it. He used it as a teaching tool and like a history lesson. And he never expressed any regret. He was glad that he paid his debt to society. He talked about it like it was yesterday. And he really had no regrets, and he said if he had to do it over again, he would.